Welcome into the air raid with Parker Kelley. It is July 14th. And first, I wanted to start out by saying, yes, I am not in my normal home studio. I'm actually out traveling. So I'm on the road right now. But what we do know about this show is college football doesn't stop. There's still plenty of things to talk about with ACC Media Days happening this week in Charlotte, North Carolina. So the show must continue as well. And there are plenty of things to talking about. Like I said, ACC Media Days happening. Actually, they're kicking off tomorrow on the 15th, and they will continue throughout the 17th. And like I mentioned last week, we will be previewing each of the Power Four conferences as their media days come. So last week it was the Big 12. Our first show was really Big 12 heavy. This will be a very ACC heavy show. I'll talk about next week at a later point. We'll need to get in the SEC with SEC Media Days happening next week in Tampa. And then to wrap up the month of July, it is the Big Ten. The Big Ten are having their media days as well. But ACC is up next. So that is what we're going to get into. Is it Miami in the field? Yes, I know Miami didn't play in their conference championship game last year, but they did play in the national championship game despite not playing in their conference championship. I have more thoughts on that later. What about the next best team in the ACC? Is it Louisville? Is it SMU? Is it Clemson? Is it Virginia Tech? Maybe with James Franklin in year one. I'll get to that as well. I do have an ACC sleeper, and it's probably a team that you're not thinking about. So I'm really excited to talk about that. And if you've been listening to 1025 this week, I actually have brought them up, but I'm going to bring them up again because it's July 7th or July 14th, and we can do that. I'm going to tier the ACC. That is going to be interesting. And then I have a complaint, a primary complaint for the tail end of the show. So make sure that you are listening for that because it is going to be very interesting. I can promise you that. So last week was our first week of the air raid with Parker Kelley. And to be honest with you, I didn't really know what to expect. I didn't know how many live listeners we'd have. I didn't know how many people we'd have going back and listening to the show. But I will say I was pleasantly surprised with all of you who decided to listen. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we can continue to grow this show and make it bigger and better. But that doesn't happen without you. So really appreciate everybody that's been listening live. And also, make sure that you are subscribed so that you never miss a live show. Also, been pumping out a lot of shorts recently. I've been clipping some of the most popular segments from our recent shows and putting those out there on YouTube as well. So make sure that you're subscribed to the channel at Parker_Kelley10. And also make sure that you're subscribed to 1025 The Game on YouTube because we do our show through my YouTube channel, through 1025's YouTube channel. So plenty of different ways to watch. All right. Enough of that. Let's go ahead and get into the real matters that we have at hand. And yes, we're starting with Miami because they are the clear-cut best team in the ACC. So I'm asking the question, is it Miami in the field in the ACC? To give you the short answer, yes, it is. They have the seventh best odds to win the national championship at plus 1,100. That is according to DraftKings. The next closest team, if you're just looking in terms of preseason odds, it's SMU at plus 10,000. So clearly, once you get to Miami and then you get to the next team, there is a significant drop off. Kind of like we talked about last week with the Big 12. If you're looking at the Big 12 as a whole and you look at tier one, right, you think of Texas Tech and then you have BYU in there, but they're under Texas Tech, kind of how it was last year. And then you kind of have a jumbled mess throughout the rest of the Big 12. Not calling the Big 12 a mess because I love the Big 12. I love watching the Big 12. But it's really anybody's game once you get past Texas Tech and once you get past BYU. Well, at least from a 50,000-foot view, looking at the ACC before the season even gets started, it's July. Still have a lot of time before training camp opens for teams, before they get back on campus and start practicing and things like that. At least as of right now, it appears to be Miami and then everybody else. There are some teams, though, that I think could contend for a conference championship, but I don't really see going too far beyond that. Right now, it's just Miami. Right now, it is just the Miami Hurricanes, and for obvious reasons, right? They return one of the best wide receivers in the country in Malachi Toney. They return one of the best running backs, a 1,000-yard rusher last year in Mark Fletcher. They got an upgrade at quarterback. And he comes by name of Darian Mensah, came over from Duke. He was second in the country last year in passing yards with just under 4,000 total. He accounted for 34 passing touchdowns, which also ranked second in the country. Only had 6 interceptions, didn't turn the ball over a whole lot, completed about 67% of his passes. If you look at any of the early mock drafts, which to be honest, I do not pay a lot of attention to this time of year, Darian Mensah is projected to be a first-round quarterback. So, and yes, there are reports, as I'm seeing in the comment section here, there are reports of what he's getting paid, and it's around the $6.5 million range. I believe that's a separate conversation. That is a lot of money. I don't know if we've seen a quarterback getting paid that much, but that is what reported what Darian Mensah is getting paid. So he's getting paid a lot of money. He gets to be the starting quarterback for Miami, taking over for Carson Beck. So just comparing the numbers between Carson Beck and Darian Mensah, Carson Beck threw for about 3,800 yards last year. So kind of similar to Darian Mensah, accounted for 30 touchdowns, but he doubled Darian Mensah's interception total. Carson Beck threw 12 interceptions last year. Darian Mensah only threw 6. Carson Beck did complete about 72.5% of his passes, so that is significantly higher than what Darian Mensah was able to accomplish. But here's the difference between the two quarterbacks, at least in my mind. When you watched Miami last year, the formula was pretty simple, right? They were going to run the football, and they were going to play really good defense, and then Carson Beck would take the throws that were there, right? Check down if need be, hit the open man, right? And he did have some great plays last year, but it wasn't anything spectacular really throughout the year. With Darian Mensah, I believe you're getting a lot more at quarterback, at least from a passing standpoint. He's not the best runner out there, but I believe he's a significant upgrade in the passing game. I believe he's a significant upgrade at quarterback, and that's really going to help Miami. 2 years ago, Miami had one of the best quarterbacks in the country, a guy that we talk about a lot, given that we are a Nashville sports talk radio station. We talk about Cam Ward and the Tennessee Titans. Well, 2 years ago, Cam Ward was the starter at Miami, and they had one of the most prolific offenses in college football that year. The problem was on defense, they couldn't stop Molasses in December. I'm going to get to their defensive numbers in just a second because I promise you those numbers are staggering and they're going to shock a lot of you. But they do upgrade at quarterback. So that's really going to help Miami, and they already have the good defense. So I expect Miami, if you look at, I don't know what preview magazines you guys might read. Personally, one of the ones that I'm reading, I think had Miami as a preseason top 10 team at number 7. I'd say that's probably fair. Now, I'm going to release my preseason poll probably about the midway point of August, and early returns are that I will have Miami a little bit higher than number 7, but we will get to that once August rolls around. Not only did Miami add Darian Mensah from Duke, but they also added his leading receiver in Cooper Barkate. They brought him in to Coral Gables. This is a guy that had 72 receptions, over 1,100 yards, which ranked 9th in the country. He had 7 touchdowns, averaged about 15.5 yards per catch. They brought in the number 1 offensive tackle, a 5-star. Some services, I believe, had him as high as the number 1 recruit in the country. Well, yep, he went to Miami. He's wanting to play for Mario Cristobal. Makes sense given that he is an offensive lineman and Mario Cristobal is an offensive line guy. That is a 5-star Jackson Cantwell. So he's going to be in charge of protecting Darian Mensah's blind side. And look, Miami has always been a good recruiter in high school. This year they bring in a top 10 recruiting class, number 8 in the country. So This is where things start to really get interesting. When you're looking at the other side of the ball, we just spend a lot of the time talking about the offense, right? Let's flip over to the defensive side. So in 2024, defense was Miami's Achilles heel. They gave up over 25 points per game. They gave up over 327 yards per game. And they gave up 30 or more points 5 different times throughout that year. Now, if you remember, the record was pretty good. They finished 10-2 in the regular season. They ended up losing the Pop-Tarts Bowl to Iowa State. That was the game in which it was a shootout. Cam Ward played the entirety of the first half. He sat out the second half in preparation for the NFL draft. So Miami finished 10-3 that year. You rewind the clock a little closer to where we are now in 2025. Here's what Miami's defense did. They were a top 5 defense in terms of points allowed per game at under 15. They were a top 12 defense in terms of yards given up per game at under 300, 294 to be exact. And they never gave up 30 points in a game at any time this year. The most points they gave up this year, 27 in the CFP semifinals to Ole Miss in the Fiesta Bowl. So they went from giving up 30 or more points 5 times in 2024 to not giving up 30 at all in 2025. The reason for that? The switch at defensive coordinator. They fired Lance Gildry in 2024. They brought in a guy by the name of Corey Heatherman from Minnesota, who I thought it was a slam dunk hire when they brought in Corey Heatherman because Minnesota had a really good defense when he was there. Doing what he did in 1 year in South Beach should not be possible. Taking a team that was in the bottom half of the country in terms of defense and turning that into a strength in 1 year, basically overnight, should not be possible. But Corey Heatherman was able to do that. He returns at defensive coordinator. Now, if you look at Mario Cristobal's history of when he got to Miami in 2022, we'll go record by record here. In 2022, they went 5-7, did not make a bowl game. 2023, they went 7-6. 2024 jumped up to double-digit wins. That was the 10-3 season that I was talking about. And then last year, they got 13 wins. 13-3 was the final record there. They made the national championship game. Not only did they make the national championship game, but they were actually at the 50-yard line with a chance to win the game in the final minutes versus Indiana. They were this close to winning a national championship game, but as most of you remember, Carson Beck threw an interception, and that's how Miami seasons ended. So you just see Miami do this under Mario Cristobal, right? Going from 5 wins to 7 wins to 10 wins to 13 wins. And if you're asking me if I think Miami is going to be better or worse than they were last year, look, you see that 13-3 record that they accomplished last year, and I'm here to tell you that I think they're going to be a better team than they were last year. And that's a team that had 13 wins, so that's a pretty crazy thing to say, but I truly believe that they upgraded at all the right spots. Offensive line's not going to be a problem, even though they do have some attrition within that unit due to the NFL draft. There was some attrition on the defensive side of the ball. I get all that. But I trust Corey Heatherman. I trust Mario Cristobal to be able to develop the offensive line. They upgraded at quarterback. They brought in more weapons to pair with Malachi Toney and Mark Fletcher, including what I believe to be maybe a top 10 receiver in the game right now, and Cooper Barkay. So I believe Miami is going to be a better team in 2026 than they were in 2025, and they had 13 wins. Pretty crazy times we're living in. So I asked the question at the start of the show. I'm going to ask again. Is it Miami in the field? I think yes, but what are some other ACC contenders? So I mentioned the next best team with the closest odds of winning the national championship game contending in the ACC was SMU. Now, I am a fan of SMU. But they were 9-4 last season. They returned their quarterback in Kevin Jennings, who, if you haven't had the opportunity to watch him play, I highly recommend that you do so. Kevin Jennings completed 66% of his passes, completed over 3,600 or threw for 3,600 yards, which ranked 8th in the country. He did have quite a few interceptions. He had a 26-13 touchdown to interception ratio. So 2-1, if you want to simplify it, not exactly great. So he will need to improve there. But in terms of being a passer, he's very, very gifted. So obviously, when you have, I may not go as far to say as a star at quarterback, but a very, very good returning starting quarterback, that's always a plus in college football. They do have a strong right side of the offensive line. I do question the left side, which is Kevin Jennings' blind side. They have a solid linebacking core. They do have to rebuild the defensive line, which was a strength for them last year, and they have new wide receivers. Do those guys exactly mesh with Kevin Jennings? That's yet to be determined. At this point in the year, before games are being played, and I believe week 0, North Carolina and TCU, when they kick off in Dublin, that game is on August 29th. So we still have a month and a half before games are being played. I'm very slow to say, hey, this is going to be a weakness for this team. I like to more so refer to it as a question mark. And for SMU, their wide receivers at this point in time are a question mark because we just don't know how they're going to mesh with Kevin Jennings. The good news is in their schedule, they do avoid Miami and Clemson, which are I don't know exactly how good Clemson is going to be this year, but historically speaking, they are usually at the top of the ACC. They do have Florida State in week 1. That is on the road in Tallahassee. They play at Louisville in week 3, which I'm going to talk about Louisville in just a second. And 3 of their more tougher games, and it is an ACC schedule, so it's not exactly a gauntlet, but 3 of their tougher games, they play Virginia, they play Cal, and they play for Virginia Tech. All of those games are in Dallas. So all of those games are going to be hosted by SMU. They do play Notre Dame, which will be a tough game. And then they end the year at Stanford. Not saying Stanford's going to be a good team, but when you have to cross a couple of time zones and the travel aspect in the Atlantic Coast Conference, nonetheless, we're talking about 2 teams from Texas and California here. That's not exactly easy. So I do think SMU is a contender in the ACC. I'd say maybe 8-4, 9-3 is where I see them. So probably not going to contend for the playoffs again like they did 2 years ago, but could certainly contend for the ACC. Now, I did tell you that I was going to talk about Louisville. Jeff Brom, who I believe is one of the more underrated coaches in all of college football, 28-12 over the last 3 seasons at the helm in Louisville. They have a transfer quarterback by the name of Lincoln Kindholz. He's a transfer from Ohio State. Now, word on the street is last year in Columbus, Lincoln Kindholz went toe-to-toe with Julian Sayin for that starting quarterback spot. And to be the starting quarterback at Ohio State, it can't just be anybody. So if you went toe-to-toe with the guy who ended up winning the job, and now you're getting to work with Jeff Brom, who we've seen on repeat since he's been at Louisville. He's brought in transfer portal quarterbacks, and he's been able to get the absolute most out of them. I think Lincoln Kindholz is a really good athlete. I'm excited to see what he can do with Jeff Brom. They return one of the better running backs in college football in Isaac Brown. Now, he only played 9 games last year. He was a little bit limited due to injury, but he had 100 attempts, 884 yards, and 7 touchdowns. This is a guy that was an All-American at the end of his freshman year. He was an All-ACC guy despite playing 3 less games. And he almost transferred too, but they were able to keep him in Louisville, which is a really big deal. Now, the main question that I have for Louisville is I'm not exactly looking at the entirety of their schedule, but I just want to know if they can survive the early portion of their schedule. They play Ole Miss week 1, neutral site game in Nashville. They play SMU week 3, which the team that I just talked about. The rest of the schedule is pretty manageable. There's no Miami. There's no Clemson. So if we're talking about the next best teams in the conference, aside from Miami, SMU and Louisville are the 2 teams that come to mind. Now, this one is probably going to be one of the more controversial topics, at least for tonight's show. That's Clemson. Because who really knows what Clemson is going to be this year? Because Dabo Swinney, we know that he went toe to toe with Nick Saban, right, in the 2010 decade, won a couple of national championships. But since NIL and transfer portal has been introduced, he's been a little bit slower to adjust, and frankly hasn't really adjusted to the modern age of college football. They will have a new starting quarterback this year. No Cade Klubnik. He's off to the NFL as a member of the New York Jets. So it's either going to be Chris Vezina or Tate Reynolds. Now, both of these guys were really highly thought of coming out of high school, don't have much experience at the collegiate level. So we're going to have to see there. Again, question mark, not necessarily weakness, just a question mark at this point in time. They do have one of the tougher ACC schedules because this is the return game where they hosted LSU last year in their Death Valley. Now they're going to the other Death Valley, and they're playing LSU in week 1. I'm going to talk about Cal a little bit later, but they're on the road at Cal in week 4. Now, I have these conversations, regardless of if it's Cal, if it's Stanford, if you have a team from the Atlantic coast going to the Pacific coast for a game, crossing 3 time zones, travel is a factor. So I do count that when I'm looking at a team schedule and I see that they're having to travel coast to coast. I do take that into consideration. So they're at Cal in week 4. They have Miami the next week at home. So they go from, traveling out to Berkeley, going back to Clemson, hosting what I think to be a preseason national championship contender. They have Virginia Tech, year 1 of James Franklin, on October 24th. And obviously they end the year with South Carolina. South Carolina is also another one of those teams we don't really know what to expect because they have 2 of the best players in college football, one at quarterback in Lenore Sellers and another guy coming off the edge in Dylan Stewart. And they also have a freak of an athlete outside at wide receiver in Nick Harbor. So that could also be a fun game. So with Clemson, this is what I wanted to talk about, because when you think of the future of Dabo Swinney at Clemson, I truly believe that for Clemson, their best opportunity to compete in this new day and age of college football, right? We talk about the NIL, we talk about the transfer portal all the time, right? I believe last year was their best opportunity to compete in the modern age. And here's why I say that. You look at last year's team, right? Led by Cade Klubnik and all the returners that they had, not only on the offensive side of the ball, and they had one of the better wide receiving cores as well. But you flip over to the defense, they had lots of seniors in there. They had lots of juniors, lots of guys that were drafted in the NFL draft, this past draft. A lot of those guys were there for 3 or 4 years. And they were older and they were experienced and they were highly recruited coming out of high school. Well, if you look at Clemson's high school recruiting, because remember, Dabo Swinney is not big into the portal. He'll take maybe 2 or 3 guys each portal cycle, but he's going to rely on high school recruiting, which, to be honest, I don't fault Dabo Swinney for. I believe high school recruiting is the lifeblood of the sport, and then you're supposed to supplement with guys from the transfer portal. So if you take a team like Clemson, who is going to rely on high school recruiting, look at what they did this last recruiting cycle for high school recruiting. They ranked 21st nationally. This is according to On3. In 2025, they were slightly worse. They finished 23rd. Well, the blue chip ratio compared to a lot of these other teams like Georgia, like Ohio State, like Oregon, is a lot lower. So if you don't have the experience, right, they're going to have an inexperienced quarterback. If you don't have the inexperience and you don't have the same blue chip ratio as some of these other teams, I just do not see a world in which Clemson is going to be back to national championship status, or maybe even, I might go as far to say, playoff contention. I just don't see it. I go through their schedule, and they went 7-5 last year. A lot of us thought that Clemson might have or should have been a playoff contender last year. They weren't. Finished 7-5 in the regular season, lost the bowl game to Penn State. I look at their schedule this year, and I just think this is a 6-6 team. This might even be a 7-5 team if they go above expectations. But I just don't see them being able to contend for the ACC this year. Now, anything can happen because we do know it's Miami and everybody else. They could maybe jump SMU. They can maybe jump Louisville. They can maybe jump Virginia Tech. I don't know. But it's just hard for me to see. I really thought Clemson's best opportunity to compete in this new landscape was last year. So let's move to another interesting discussion point, and that is Virginia Tech, year one under James Franklin. So I went back and I looked at James Franklin's previous coaching records, right? What did he do year one at Vanderbilt? He went 6-7. That was back in 2011. Year one at Penn State, he went 7-6. That was 2014. So if you're seeing a 6-win total in his first year in the SEC, a 7-win total his first year in the Big Ten at Penn State, I think it's fair to expect that Virginia Tech could be anywhere within the 6-6 to 7-5 range this year. They did import a lot of players that were on Penn State's team last year, which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Even though Penn State wasn't the best. A lot of the guys that were committed to Penn State, and Penn State had a really good recruiting class. A lot of the guys that were committed to play for James Franklin at Penn State before he got fired ended up flipping to Virginia Tech. So the good thing about James Franklin and why I believe he's such a perfect fit at Virginia Tech is James Franklin was never a bad coach. Now, he didn't necessarily achieve to the level that Penn State fans thought that he should achieve, right? Penn State wanted to compete for national championships. I understand why they wanted to do so, right? I mean, it's Penn State. They're one of the more historical teams in college football. They wanted to contend for the playoffs year in and year out. They wanted to contend for the Big Ten year in and year out. And they didn't necessarily do so because they would beat up on all of the teams that they were favored to beat. But when it came time for them to, all right, now it's time to beat Michigan. It's time to beat Ohio State. It's time to beat Oregon. They just wouldn't do so. And I do believe that what led to the downfall of James Franklin at Penn State was that game last year, that double overtime game when they hosted Oregon. It was the whiteout game. Lots of high expectations. I don't think Penn State was a favorite, and if they were, it was a small favorite, and they lost that game because it had all been accumulating. It had all been building up to that point, and we finally reached the tip top of the mountain where, okay, James Franklin, it's now or never. You have the team. You have the players. It's time to beat the teams that when you come to Penn State, you're supposed to beat. And he didn't do it. And I thought that led ultimately to the downfall of James Franklin at Penn State. Now you're going to Virginia Tech, who hasn't been relevant for a while. And I really wish that for some of you that may be listening in the audience that are a little bit on the younger side, you may not remember how good Virginia Tech was back in the day when Frank Beamer was their head coach, when they were in their heyday, when he was in his prime, and they had guys like Michael Vick at quarterback. Those are really fun Virginia Tech teams to watch because they were always in the top 10 and they were always in the conversation for a New Year's Six bowl. So Virginia Tech really hasn't been relevant in a while, and I think James Franklin will bring that. I think he will definitely bring them to relevancy, at least in the ACC. Now, a guy that I love to say this guy's name, Ethan Grunkemeyer. Let's get Grunky. He's going to be their starting quarterback at Virginia Tech this year. He was at Penn State last year, ended up starting in the bowl game against Clemson. So a very talented guy, at least coming out of high school, and that is who James Franklin is handpicked to be his starting quarterback at Virginia Tech. So I'm interested to see how that goes. I'm really excited to see year one under James Franklin. Don't expect 9-3. Don't expect 10-2. Don't expect them to contend for the ACC. Don't expect them to contend for a playoff spot. But they may surprise some people. They do have a little bit of a tough schedule, though. I will say this: they play at Cal, they play at Clemson, they have a bye week, then they're at SMU, and they're at Miami. So 4 really tough road games. They do have the bye week sprinkled in there, like I said, and then in between that SMU and Miami game, they do have a home game. So at least that's broken up a little bit, but not an easy schedule for Virginia Tech. So I would say, if you're expecting 6-6, if you're expecting a bowl game, if you're expecting 7-5, that's certainly really fair as well. So I wanted to get to my ACC sleeper. And if you were listening to 102.5 at any point earlier this week, I do a show with Jake Lyman, Next Man Up, live 9 to noon, Monday through Friday. We were talking about, because we're going kind of the same route that we're going on this show. We're previewing each of the major conferences. So this week it's the ACC with ACC Media Days starting tomorrow. We got into a really good conversation about our ACC sleepers and who might those be. For me, there's one team that really comes to my mind, and that is Cal, the California Golden Bears. They have a new head coach by the name of Tosh Lupoy. He's one of these Saban disciples, right? He was on the staff at Alabama a few years ago. He ended up going to the NFL for a little bit to serve as a defensive analyst. He was most recently the defensive coordinator of the Oregon Ducks under Dan Lanning. Now, Cal is not they didn't go and just blow it up in high school recruiting this year, and I think that's fair to expect given that Tosh Lupoy was literally coaching the Oregon Ducks on the way to the college football playoff semifinal game while also trying to balance taking over as the head coach at Cal. He did bring in a really good transfer portal class, ranked 15th in the country, very high standards for Cal. They have a quarterback, and I have prided myself on mastering this pronunciation. Jaron Kiawe Sagapulgatele, also known as JKS. Hard name to pronounce. And for the record, since we're on the air right now and I have a microphone in front of my face, I just wanted to say that when I started this show last year in podcast form only, we weren't on YouTube at the time, I started calling him JKS because it was just too hard of a name to pronounce. And then I started watching Cal games last year when they'd play on ESPN and stuff like that. And I noticed some of the ESPN commentators started to call him JKS as well. So I'm not going to go as far to say as I started that, but I definitely did. So JKS, he's a dog. That's one thing that you need to know about him. He threw for close to 3,500 passing yards last year. He had 18 touchdowns, so a modest number. Remember, he was starting as a true freshman, and he recorded 4 more touchdowns with his legs. JKS was a 5-star quarterback coming out of high school, originally committed to Oregon. He actually made it to campus in Eugene, expected to be the starter, realized how good Dante Moore was, who was going to be the guy starting in front of him. He hit the exit door. This is back when we had a spring transfer portal window. And he ended up going to Cal, and it all works out because a former Oregon coach is going to end up being the head coach at Cal, in Tosh Lupoy. So one thing you need to know about Cal is they have a new offensive coordinator. And this name might sound familiar, but it's a guy by the name of Nick Rolovich. He was the head coach at Hawaii a while ago. He was the head coach at Washington State. The type of offense that Nick Rolovich runs is very conducive to JKS's strengths. He runs the run and shoot. So that's going to be a really fun offense to watch. They have a really good wide receiver core. They brought in a wide receiver in the transfer portal by the name of Chase Hendricks. He was a 1,000-yard guy from Ohio last year. So expect fireworks if you're watching Cal. I'm sure that Tosh Lupoy is going to get that defense up to par. You know, he had really good defenses at Oregon. So Cal may not be Oregon's level of defensive standard to start, but I'm sure that they'll eventually get to that point, and that'll be a good compliment to what the offense can bring to the table. Let's look at Cal's schedule. I wanted to make a note of this game because not only is it a former Pac-12 game, but they're taking on UCLA, which, by the way, RIP to the Pac-12. They play UCLA in week 1. I know how bad UCLA was last year. Trust me, I understand. I'm not willing to discount UCLA this year. I'm just not. Their new head coach, Bob Chesney, came over from James Madison, who was in the college football playoff. Whether you think they should have been or not, they were. They were probably one of, if not the best group of 5 team last year. I am a big fan of Bob Chesney. He's worked his way up through the ranks, D3, D2, FCS, eventually got his chance at the group of 6 level, and is now in one of the 2 major conferences in college football in the Big Ten. I'm not ready to discount UCLA. I think UCLA can be very sneaky this year. So Cal has UCLA in week 1. They cross the country 3 separate times this season. They're at Syracuse in week 2. They're at NC State on Halloween. They have a bye week, and then they're at Virginia November 14th. Not easy. A very unforgiving travel slate for Cal this year. They have 3 straight road games from late October to mid-November, the 3 games that I just mentioned. They do get to play host to Clemson, and they get to play host to Virginia Tech. There's no Miami. There's no Louisville. It's a pretty manageable schedule once you get outside of the fact that they have to cross the country 3 times. So that is my ACC sleeper. I'm a big believer in JKS. I'm a big believer in Tosh Lupoy, and I'm a big believer in Cal. Pretty brisk pace here on the show tonight. I have 2 more things before I wrap up the show. I wanted to tier the ACC. Now, I understand that this is a show based out of the South, like we're doing a show from Nashville, right? This is a Nashville sports talk radio station. I get that we talk about the SEC a lot, and trust me, on the next show, we are talking SEC. I know that a lot of you probably aren't as into the ACC as the SEC. I get all that. But since ACC Media Days start tomorrow, I did just want to give a brief preview. We're not going to get too into the weeds here, but I did want to tier the ACC. So I mentioned at the very tip-top portion of the show, you have your national championship contenders. I think it's pretty fair to say, and if I were to poll you as an audience and ask you, is the ACC and the Big 12, are they both one-bid leagues for the college football playoff? I would assume that most of you would say yes. And I would assume that those 2 teams would be Texas Tech in the Big 12 and Miami in the ACC. So we're past that. Miami is the lone national championship contender in the ACC. But who's that next tier? Who's in tier number 2? I would put Louisville in there. I would put SMU in there. But again, I see both of these teams being around the 8 to 9 win range, so it's hard to say that they're any better than ACC contender. I have a large tier 3. I put Clemson in there just because we don't know what to expect with a new starting quarterback. Lots of newness on that team. I put Virginia Tech in there. Year 1 under James Franklin, they got a little bit of a bump in there. I put Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech had a good year last year with Brent Key. Big believer in Brent Key, by the way. Hopefully we're able to talk to him at some point, and you guys would be able to hear that. I'm a big believer in Brent Key. They do have a new starting quarterback. No more how am I blanking on his name? No more Haynes King. So they brought in Fernando Mendoza's brother, Alberto. He transferred from Indiana to Georgia Tech. So you have some newness at the quarterback position. They do have a transfer running back from Alabama by the name of Justice Haynes, and Georgia Tech is a very run-heavy, play-good defense style of team. So I could see Georgia Tech being good again this year. I don't know if they'll contend for the ACC, but I put them in that who knows category. I put Pitt in there. Pitt lost, not just lost, one of their better players on the defensive side of the ball, Rasheem Biles. He went to Texas. He's a linebacker. But they got raided by the transfer portal. The good news is Pat Narduzzi is their head coach, and they've had a lot of stability there. He's been there for double-digit years, double-digit seasons, and they have a revelation at quarterback, a guy by the name of Mason Heinschel, who started as a true freshman last year. He is the starter again this year. I put them in that who knows category. I also put Virginia in there. No more Chandler Morris. They benefited from a very easy schedule. They're not going to get to 11 wins like they did last year. I just don't think that's going to happen. But their quarterback, transferred from Missouri, Bo Pribula, who was actually at Penn State before that, I put them in that who knows category. Definitely not getting into 11 wins like they did last year. But I think they could be sneaky. I'll say that. Tier 4 could surprise some people, also known as the dark horse tier. I put Cal in there, who I just talked about. I put NC State in there. The reason I put NC State in there is Dave Doran. He's been there a while. They have a quarterback by the name of CJ Bailey, who is very fun to watch. If you haven't watched him, I recommend you watch him as well. When NC State's not getting talked about, that's typically when they do their most damage. So I put NC State in that dark horse category. They kind of go along with Cal. The mushy middle, a.k.a. the mushy bottom, Duke and Wake Forest, don't have high expectations for either of those teams this year. Duke got absolutely rated by the portal. As we talked about with Miami, took their two best players in Darian Mensah and Cooper Barkate, just rated. Duke was absolutely rated by the portal. If Duke wants to win the ACC again this year like they did last, Manny Diaz is going to have the best coaching performance of his career. And frankly, I don't see that happening this year. And then tier 6, the absolute bottom of the SEC or the ACC, put the blinders on. Florida State, that speaks for itself. North Carolina also speaks for itself. Boston College and Stanford. They are at the bottom tier of the ACC. So I will put those out on social media. Make sure that you are following me on the socials, Instagram, Twitter. I'm also on TikTok now. I haven't been on TikTok really my whole life, but since this show started, I feel the need to be on TikTok. I'm also on TikTok at Parker_Kelley10. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel as well, because I will also put those out. So here's where I wanted to end the show, and we're going to have a little bit of fun here because it is still the summer. It is still July. We still have a month and a half before games are being played. I was on Twitter earlier this week, and I saw a list that was put out by Complex, but it was CNBC who put this list out, and I don't know who put out this list. It could be drugs. That's kind of my initial reaction to this. But they put out a list of the 10 worst states to live in for 2026. Again, this is according to CNBC. I'll just go ahead and read the list for you since I have the list pulled up here. Tennessee is at number 1. Texas is at number 2. Indiana at number 3. Louisiana at 4. Georgia at 5. Utah at 6. Missouri at 7. Alabama at 8. Oklahoma at 9. And Arkansas at 10. So my first reaction to this was, clearly there's a lot of Southern representation here. But Tennessee at 1. Tennessee, specifically Nashville in general, where I live, and I'm in this every day. I drive throughout the city. I experience the traffic that comes along with the city. I see how many apartment complexes are being put up. I see how many people are moving here. I couldn't tell you in the apartment complex that I live in, I couldn't tell you how many California license plates I see, how many Illinois license plates I see. Heck, I see people from Michigan. I see a lot of people from the north moving here. I see a lot of people from the west moving here. A lot of people are moving to Tennessee, and Nashville as a whole is booming. And when there's not enough room in Nashville, the city, people are extending out really into Middle Tennessee. That includes Lebanon. That includes Murfreesboro. That includes all these other areas. So, again, I don't know who made this list. But I have a huge bone to pick with them because Tennessee is at number 1, and that's just absurd. Anybody with a functioning brain knows that Tennessee is not the worst state to live in. Might I remind you, and no offense to these states, because I've heard there are great people in Idaho, there are great people in Wyoming, Iowa, the Dakotas. But would you rather live in one of those states or would you rather live in Tennessee? And I'm going to pause. I'm going to pause to hear everybody's answers because I don't hear a lot of people clamoring to live in Iowa. Again, no offense to Iowa. I'm sure there are great people there. But where are those states? Where's Idaho? Where's Wyoming? Texas is at number 2. I believe Texas is one of the cheaper states to live in the country, and yet Texas is at number 2. Indiana at 3. Okay, that's fair. I actually go to Indiana quite a bit. So Indiana at 3, sure. Louisiana at 4, I don't know. Really, I mean, there's New Orleans, right? There's Baton Rouge. Georgia's at number 5. Atlanta's one of the biggest cities in the country. They have a great aquarium there. They have a College Football Hall of Fame. Plenty think the Koch Museum is in Atlanta. So Georgia at number 5, that didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. You have Oklahoma and Arkansas, Alabama, Missouri. Lots of Southern representation. Utah's in there. But again, I don't know who made this list, but it is truly one of the worst lists that I ever seen. And that is my primary complaint this week. Again, I've been having a great summer. I've been having a great week, getting ready to go on vacation here. So there hasn't been a whole lot to dampen my mood, but I saw this list and I'm just like, man, Tennessee at 1? That makes no sense. And whoever made this list, they might be on drugs. So I don't know. But at the same time, I started thinking to myself, okay, with Tennessee at number 1, maybe it'll convince somebody who's on the fence of maybe moving to Tennessee, maybe not to. And honestly, I have no problem with that. To be honest, Nashville is full. Tennessee is full. Everybody's moving here. You're more than welcome to visit, but please don't move here. We have a lot of people already. But again, feel free to come visit. I just had to get that off my chest because I saw that earlier this week and I couldn't believe it. But at the same time, if it keeps more people from moving here, maybe it is a good thing. So a couple of programming notes. Our next show will be on Thursday. Same time, 6 p.m. Central Time, 7 p.m. Eastern. We're going to talk SEC football with SEC Media Days happening next week. Now, next week, I will be out of town. I will be on vacation, so there won't be any shows next week. We will resume the following week, just in time for Big Ten Media Days and the start of fall camp for a good amount of these teams. We'll be wrapping up the month of July, so there will be plenty of stuff to talk about. So I kind of hated that my vacation that I planned a while ago happened to fall on the same week as SEC Media Days, but that's just life. That kind of happens. I did want to make sure to talk about the SEC before Media Days kick off in Tampa. So we're going to do that, and we're going to have a great time doing it. Again, really appreciate everybody that's been listening live. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel at Parker_Kelley10. You can also search the Air Raid with Parker Kelley, and you will find it there. Make sure that you're subscribed. If you haven't subscribed, or if you think you're subscribed, just go ahead and double check. Again, it doesn't sign you up for anything. It doesn't put you on any type of promotional list, or you don't have to pay anything. It's free, and we'd like to keep the show free as much as possible, and we can't do that without you. So make sure that you're subscribed. Also subscribe to 1025 The Game on YouTube, where you can also catch the show. We will be back on Thursday to talk a lot of SEC football. In the meantime, take care. Enjoy. I heard the MLB All-Star Game is tonight. If you happen to be into that, I will be watching. Enjoy that. Enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy your summer. Take care. God bless.